Question 1. Examination of the data shows that a long-term client of BIDV, with whom you have developed a good working relationship, has offered you a valuable gift during a recent business meeting. This gift is intended to express appreciation for your services. You are aware that BIDV has internal policies regarding the acceptance of gifts from clients. What is the most appropriate course of action for a BIDV employee in this situation? Option A. Lightly decline the gift, explaining that BIDV policy prohibits accepting gifts of significant value from clients, and suggest an alternative way for the client to express their appreciation that aligns with policy. Option B. Immediately report the gift to your direct supervisor, requesting their personal guidance on how to proceed without consulting BIDV official policy first. Option C. Accept the gift, as it is a token of appreciation from a valued client, and discreetly keep it without reporting it to avoid causing any administrative burden. Option D. Accept the gift and then attempt to determine its value later to decide if it needs to be reported. The correct answer is A. Politely decline the gift, explaining that BIDV policy prohibits accepting gifts of significant value from clients, and suggest an alternative way for the client to express their appreciation that aligns with policy. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an employee of BIDV to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with internal policies and Vietnamese banking regulations. The core challenge lies in balancing personal relationships with professional obligations to maintain the integrity and reputation of BIDV. Careful judgment is required to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, which could lead to regulatory scrutiny or damage to client trust. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to BIDV-established policies on gifts and entertainment, and potentially seeking guidance from the compliance department. This approach is best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency, fairness, and compliance with regulatory frameworks governing financial institutions in Vietnam. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of employees in the banking sector, aiming to prevent undue influence or preferential treatment. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the gift without disclosure or seeking clarification fails to uphold the principles of transparency and accountability. This could violate BIDV internal code of conduct and potentially contravene regulations from the State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, concerning conflicts of interest and ethical standards for banking personnel. Accepting a gift of significant value from a client without proper procedure could be construed as an attempt to gain an unfair advantage or create an obligation, thereby compromising professional judgment. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately reporting the gift to a direct supervisor without first consulting BIDV official policy or the compliance department, might be premature and could create unnecessary alarm. Reporting is generally encouraged. The initial step should be to understand the established procedures for handling such situations, which often involve specific reporting channels or thresholds for disclosure. This bypasses the defined internal control mechanisms designed to handle such matters efficiently and appropriately. A further incorrect approach, such as downplaying the value of the gift and keeping it without any record, is ethically unsound and a clear violation of compliance protocols. This demonstrates a disregard for internal controls and regulatory expectations, potentially leading to accusations of dishonesty or concealment. It undermines the trust placed in the employee by BIDV and its clients. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of BIDV internal policies and relevant Vietnamese banking laws. When faced with a potential conflict of interest or an ethical dilemma, an employee should first consult their organization's code of conduct and compliance guidelines. If the situation is ambiguous or involves significant value, seeking advice from the compliance department or legal counsel is the most prudent step. This ensures that actions taken are both ethically sound and legally compliant, safeguarding both the individual and the institution. Question 2. Assessment of how a relationship manager at BIDV should respond when a corporate client requests advance, non-public information regarding the timing and technical details of an upcoming core banking system upgrade to better plan their business operations. Option A. Vaguely assure the client that their transactions will be prioritized during the upgrade period to minimize disruption to their business. Option B. Decline the request, citing BIDV internal policies on information confidentiality and relevant Vietnamese banking regulations, and offer to assist the client with their needs through standard channels once the upgrade is complete. Option C. Provide the client with the specific internal timeline and technical specifications of the system upgrade, explaining how this information will help them optimize their business operations. Option D. Ignore the client's request and continue with standard banking procedures without acknowledging the query. Correct answer is C. Provide the client with the specific internal timeline and technical specifications of the system upgrade, explaining how this information will help them optimize their business operations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in banking where an employee, acting on behalf of a client, seeks to leverage their internal knowledge of BIDV operational procedures and upcoming system upgrades. A professional challenge lies in balancing the client's request for efficiency with the bank's stringent internal policies and regulatory obligations concerning information security, data integrity, and fair market practices. Mismanagement of this situation could lead to data breaches, unfair advantages for certain clients, and regulatory penalties for BIDV. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance while maintaining client relationships. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to BIDV internal policies and relevant Vietnamese banking regulations regarding the handling of confidential information and system upgrade procedures. This means that any information about system upgrades, including their timing and impact, is considered proprietary and sensitive. The employee must decline the client's request to access or utilize this information, explaining that such actions would violate internal policies and potentially Vietnamese banking laws designed to ensure fair competition and data security. The employee should then offer to assist the client with their banking needs through standard approved channels once the system upgrade is complete and operational, or by providing general information about the upgrade's expected benefits without revealing specific internal timelines or technical details. This upholds ethical standards and regulatory compliance by preventing the misuse of privileged information. Incorrect approaches analysis. An incorrect approach would be to provide the client with the requested information about the system upgrade's internal timeline and technical specifications. This action directly violates BIDV internal confidentiality policies and potentially Vietnamese banking laws that prohibit the disclosure of non-public material information that could be used for unfair advantage. It also compromises the integrity of the system upgrade process by potentially exposing it to external manipulation or premature exploitation. Another incorrect approach would be to vaguely promise expedited processing or special treatment for the client's transactions during the upgrade period without a clear, policy-approved basis. This could be interpreted as preferential treatment, which is unethical and may violate regulations against discriminatory practices or market manipulation. It also sets a dangerous precedent for other clients. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's request and proceed with their standard banking activities without addressing the client's query. While not directly disclosing information, this failure to communicate and manage client expectations appropriately can lead to dissatisfaction and reputational damage for BIDV. It also misses an opportunity to reinforce the bank's commitment to compliance and security. Professional reasoning. Professionals in banking, particularly at an institution like BIDV, must operate within a robust framework of internal policies and Vietnamese banking regulations. When faced with client requests that could potentially breach these boundaries, the decision-making process should prioritize 1. Understanding and identifying the relevant internal policies and external regulations. 2. Assessing the potential risks and consequences of fulfilling or denying the request. 3. Communicating clearly and professionally with the client, explaining the limitations imposed by policies and regulations without being dismissive. 4. Offering alternative compliance solutions or assistance. 5. Documenting the interaction and the decision made. This systematic approach ensures that client relationships are managed responsibly, while safeguarding the bank's integrity and compliance standing. Question 3. Which approach would be most appropriate for a BIDV employee to take when they discover a potential conflict of interest involving a significant client and a personal acquaintance who is also a vendor to the bank? Option A. Discreetly inform the acquaintance of the potential conflict and ask them to withdraw their bid to avoid complications. Option B. Proactively disclose the potential conflict of interest to their direct supervisor and the bank's compliance department for guidance and review. Option C. Immediately proceed with the transaction as it is a standard business practice and the acquaintance is a trusted vendor. Option D. Ignore the potential conflict, assuming it will not impact the decision-making process or the bank's interests. The correct answer is C. Immediately proceed with the transaction as it is a standard business practice and the acquaintance is a trusted vendor. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BIDV employee because it requires balancing the bank's commercial interests with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The employee must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that decisions are made in the best interest of the bank and its clients, adhering strictly to Vietnamese banking regulations and BIDV internal policies. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and escalating potential conflicts of interest to the appropriate internal channels for review and guidance. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, integrity, and adherence to regulatory frameworks governing financial institutions in Vietnam. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of sound corporate governance and risk management expected of employees at BIDV, ensuring that decisions are not influenced by personal gain or external pressures, thereby protecting the bank's reputation and financial stability. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the transaction without disclosure or seeking internal approval fails to uphold the duty of care and loyalty owed to BIDV. This could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and potential financial losses for the bank. It bypasses established internal control mechanisms designed to prevent conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with Vietnamese laws and banking practices. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the potential conflict and hope it resolves itself, is equally problematic. This passive stance abdicates responsibility and can exacerbate the situation, potentially leading to more severe consequences if the conflict materializes and is discovered later. It demonstrates a lack of professional diligence and an unwillingness to engage with the ethical and regulatory implications of the situation. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of BIDV code of conduct and relevant Vietnamese banking laws. Employees should be trained to recognize potential conflicts of interest, understand the reporting procedures, and prioritize ethical considerations and regulatory compliance above all else. When in doubt, seeking guidance from supervisors or the compliance department is paramount. Question 4. Implementation of internal controls at BIDV to prevent the misuse of material non-public information requires employees to exercise sound judgment when interacting with clients. During a routine client meeting, a high-net-worth individual, who is a significant client of BIDV, casually mentions an upcoming, unannounced strategic partnership that could significantly impact the stock price of a publicly traded company. The employee recognizes this information as potentially sensitive and not yet publicly disclosed. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to BIDV regulatory obligations and ethical standards in this situation? Option A. Discreetly document the client's statement and immediately report it through BIDV-designated internal compliance channels for assessment. Option B. Dismiss the client's comment as casual market speculation and take no further action. Option C. Advise the client that this information could be valuable and suggest they consider making a trade based on it. Option D. Acknowledge the information and subtly probe the client for more details to better understand its implications. The correct answer is A. Discreetly document the client's statement and immediately report it through BIDV-designated internal compliance channels for assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BIDV employee due to the inherent conflict between client relationship management and adherence to strict regulatory guidelines concerning insider information. The employee must navigate the delicate balance of maintaining client trust while upholding the integrity of financial markets and BIDV reputation. The core difficulty lies in recognizing when a client's casual remark crosses the line from general market sentiment to potentially material non-public information, and acting appropriately without jeopardizing the business relationship. The correct approach involves discreetly documenting the client's statement and immediately reporting it through the designated internal channels at BIDV for further investigation. This is the best professional practice because it directly aligns with BIDV obligations under Vietnamese banking regulations and securities laws, which mandate strict controls against the misuse of insider information. By reporting internally, the employee initiates a formal process that allows compliance officers to assess the information's materiality and determine the appropriate course of action, thereby preventing potential market abuse and protecting BIDV from regulatory penalties and reputational damage. This proactive reporting demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's comment as insignificant without further consideration. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even seemingly innocuous remarks to contain material non-public information, thereby risking a breach of insider trading regulations. Another incorrect approach is to directly advise the client on trading strategies based on this information, as this constitutes acting on or disseminating insider information, a severe regulatory violation. Finally, engaging in a discussion with the client to elicit more details about the information would also be an incorrect approach, as it could be construed as actively seeking to obtain insider information, further compounding the ethical and regulatory risks. Professionals at BIDV should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves a continuous assessment of client interactions, a clear understanding of what constitutes material non-public information, and a robust internal reporting mechanism. When in doubt, the principle of erring on the side of caution and reporting internally for guidance is paramount. Question 5. Compliance review shows that a long-standing corporate client of BIDV has requested a series of unusual, high-value international wire transfers to a newly established offshore entity with no apparent business connection to the client's known operations. The client has provided minimal supporting documentation for these transfers, citing speed and efficiency as paramount. Option A. Seek further clarification from the client regarding the purpose and legitimacy of the offshore entity and the nature of the transactions, requesting additional supporting documentation as per BIDV internal policies and relevant Vietnamese banking regulations. Option B. Immediately process the wire transfers as requested to maintain good client relations and meet the client's stated need for speed. Option C. Advise the client to open a new account with a different financial institution that may have less stringent documentation requirements for such transactions. Option D. Decline the wire transfers and inform the client that their request cannot be accommodated due to insufficient documentation. Correct answer is B. Immediately process the wire transfers as requested to maintain good client relations and meet the client's stated need for speed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an employee of BIDV to navigate a situation where a client's request, while seemingly straightforward, could potentially lead to non-compliance with internal policies and Vietnamese banking regulations. The challenge lies in balancing client service with the imperative to uphold regulatory integrity and protect the bank from reputational and financial risks. Careful judgment is required to identify potential red flags and ensure that all actions taken are within legal and ethical boundaries. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of BIDV internal Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) policies, as well as relevant Vietnamese banking laws and regulations. This approach prioritizes due diligence and risk assessment. By seeking clarification and additional documentation, the employee demonstrates a commitment to compliance. This is justified by Vietnamese banking regulations, such as those issued by the State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, which mandate robust KYC procedures to prevent financial crimes and ensure the integrity of the financial system. Ethical considerations also dictate that employees act in the best interest of the bank and its stakeholders by avoiding transactions that could facilitate illicit activities. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the transaction without further inquiry. This fails to meet the due diligence requirements mandated by Vietnamese banking laws and BIDV internal policies. Such a failure could expose BIDV to significant risks, including regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and involvement in money laundering or other financial crimes. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand the underlying reasons or offering alternative compliance solutions. This demonstrates poor client relationship management and a lack of proactive problem solving, potentially alienating a legitimate customer while failing to address any underlying compliance concerns. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of client requests against established policies and regulations. This includes 1. Identifying any potential red flags or deviations from normal procedures. 2. Consulting internal policies and relevant legal frameworks. 3. Seeking clarification from the client and or internal compliance departments. And 4. Documenting all actions and decisions taken. When in doubt, escalating the matter to a supervisor or the compliance department is crucial. Question 6. During the evaluation of a candidate's application for a position at BIDV, Commercial Bank for Investment and Development of Vietnam, what is the most ethically and regulatorily sound approach to gathering additional information beyond the submitted resume and application form, considering Vietnamese data protection principles? Option A. Seeking explicit consent from the candidate to access specific, job-relevant information from their social media or other sources, clearly outlining the purpose of the review. Option B. Accessing the candidate's publicly available social media profiles to assess their personal lifestyle and social interactions. Option C. Relying on informal inquiries and rumors from mutual acquaintances to gauge the candidate's character and personal background. Option D. Reviewing publicly accessible news articles or professional publications that mention the candidate, regardless of their relevance to the specific role. The correct answer is B. Accessing the candidate's publicly available social media profile to assess their personal lifestyle and social interactions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a candidate at BIDV, Commercial Bank for Investment and Development of Vietnam, by requiring them to navigate the ethical and regulatory landscape surrounding customer data privacy and the responsible use of information obtained during a hiring process. The core difficulty lies in balancing the bank's legitimate interest in assessing a candidate's suitability with the imperative to protect sensitive personal information. A careful judgment is required to ensure that any information used for evaluation is obtained and handled in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, respecting the candidate's privacy rights. The correct approach involves a commitment to ethical conduct and strict adherence to Vietnamese data protection laws and BIDV internal policies. This approach prioritizes obtaining explicit consent from the candidate before accessing or utilizing any personal information beyond what is voluntarily provided in their application. It also mandates that any information used for assessment is directly relevant to the job requirements and is handled with the utmost confidentiality. This aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, ensuring that personal data is only processed for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes, and is not further processed in a manner that is incompatible with those purposes. This is crucial for maintaining trust and upholding BIDV reputation as a responsible financial institution. An incorrect approach that involves accessing publicly available social media profiles without the candidate's knowledge or consent for the purpose of assessing their personal life or non-professional conduct represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Vietnamese data protection regulations, such as those potentially derived from the Civil Code and specific decrees on personal data protection, emphasize the need for consent and lawful processing. Such an action would likely violate the candidate's right to privacy and could be construed as unauthorized data collection. Another incorrect approach, which is to use information gathered from informal channels or rumors about the candidate's personal life, is equally problematic. This relies on unsubstantiated information, lacks objectivity, and fails to adhere to principles of fairness and due diligence in hiring. It also bypasses established procedures for verifying information and could lead to discriminatory hiring practices, which are prohibited. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the relevant legal framework governing data privacy and employment in Vietnam, as well as BIDV-specific internal codes of conduct and hiring policies. Candidates should always assume that personal information is sensitive and requires appropriate handling. When in doubt about the permissibility of accessing or using certain information, the safest and most ethical course of action is to seek clarification from HR or legal departments, or to obtain explicit consent from the individual concerned. The focus should always be on objective, job-related criteria and information obtained through legitimate and transparent channels. Question 7. Stakeholder feedback indicates that a long-standing corporate client of BIDV has requested a highly unconventional financing structure that appears to circumvent standard risk assessment procedures, with the stated aim of accelerating loan approval. The client has expressed frustration with the typical due diligence process. Which of the following approaches best aligns with BIDV regulatory obligations and best practices in Vietnam? Option A. Advise the client on how to structure their request to exploit any ambiguities in existing regulations to achieve their desired outcome. Option B. Immediately approve the financing structure as requested to maintain the client relationship and expedite the process, assuming the client is acting in good faith. Option C. Politely decline the request, citing standard procedures without exploring the client's underlying needs or potential compliant alternatives. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed financing structure against BIDV internal credit policies and relevant Vietnamese banking laws and regulations, and if compliant, proceed with the standard due diligence. If not, engage the client to explain the concerns and explore alternative compliance solutions. The correct answer is B. Immediately approve the financing structure as requested to maintain the client relationship and expedite the process, assuming the client is acting in good faith. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's desire for a specific outcome and the bank's regulatory obligations to ensure fair and transparent dealings. BIDV, as a commercial bank, must operate within the legal and regulatory framework of Vietnam, which emphasizes consumer protection, fair competition, and the prevention of deceptive practices. The core of the challenge lies in balancing client satisfaction with adherence to these principles. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the client's request against BIDV-established policies and relevant Vietnamese banking regulations. This approach prioritizes integrity and compliance by first understanding the client's underlying needs and then evaluating the feasibility and regulatory permissibility of their proposed solution. The bank can offer alternatives that are both beneficial to the client and compliant with the law. This aligns with the principles of responsible banking, ensuring that BIDV acts in the best interest of its clients while upholding its legal and ethical duties. Specifically, Vietnamese banking laws and regulations, such as those governing credit operations and customer service, mandate that banks act with prudence, transparency, and fairness. Providing advice that could lead to regulatory breaches or unfair advantages for one party over another would violate these foundational principles. An incorrect approach would be to immediately agree to the client's request without proper due diligence. This could lead to regulatory violations, such as engaging in practices that are deemed unfair or misleading under Vietnamese consumer protection laws, or potentially facilitating activities that contravene anti-money laundering or prudential regulations. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand their needs or explore compliant alternatives. This demonstrates a lack of customer service and could damage the client relationship, while also missing an opportunity to identify legitimate client needs that could be met within regulatory boundaries. Finally, attempting to find loopholes or obscure interpretations of regulations to satisfy the client's request is ethically unsound and risks severe penalties, undermining the bank's reputation and the stability of the financial system. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with active listening to fully comprehend the client's objective. This is followed by a rigorous review of internal policies and applicable Vietnamese laws and regulations. If the client's request appears problematic, the next step is to engage in a transparent discussion with the client, explaining the constraints and exploring mutually agreeable, compliant solutions. This process ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and legally sound, safeguarding both the client's interests and the bank's integrity. Question 8. Performance analysis shows that a specific department at BIDV is consistently exceeding its targets for customer data processing efficiency. However, concerns have been raised internally regarding the potential for inadequate data anonymization during this accelerated processing. Which of the following approaches best ensures BIDV compliance with Vietnamese data protection laws and maintains customer trust? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive audit of the department's data handling procedures, verifying adherence to BIDV internal data privacy policies and relevant Vietnamese regulations on customer data protection and anonymization. Option B. Rely on the department's consistent achievement of efficiency targets as an indicator that their data processing methods are compliant and effective. Option C. Assume that the existing data anonymization protocols are sufficient. Given the department's long-standing operational history and lack of reported breaches. Option D. Implement a simplified data validation checklist for the department to ensure basic data integrity without disrupting their current high-speed processing workflow. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive audit of the department's data handling procedures, verifying adherence to BIDV internal data privacy policies and relevant Vietnamese regulations on customer data protection and anonymization. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BIDV employee because it requires balancing the bank's operational efficiency with adherence to regulatory requirements concerning customer data privacy and security. The core tension lies in the potential for unauthorized access or misuse of sensitive customer information if internal controls are not robust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that, while performance metrics are met, they do not incentivize or lead to breaches of confidentiality or data protection laws applicable to Vietnamese financial institutions. The correct approach involves a thorough review of BIDV internal data handling policies and procedures, cross-referencing them with relevant Vietnamese laws and banking regulations. This includes verifying that access controls are appropriately implemented, data anonymization or pseudonymization techniques are used where applicable, and that staff training on data protection is current and effective. This approach is correct because it prioritizes compliance with legal mandates and ethical obligations to protect customer data, which is a fundamental requirement for any financial institution operating in Vietnam. Adherence to these regulations safeguards BIDV from legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on meeting performance targets without verifying the underlying data handling practices. This could lead to overlooking vulnerabilities in data security or privacy protocols, potentially resulting in regulatory non-compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that existing procedures are adequate without periodic review and validation against current legal standards and best practices, especially in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. A third incorrect approach would be to implement superficial checks that do not delve into the actual implementation and effectiveness of data protection measures, thereby creating a false sense of security. All these incorrect approaches fail to uphold the duty of care owed to customers and the regulatory obligations imposed by Vietnamese authorities. Professionals at BIDV should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory landscape governing data privacy and security in Vietnam. This involves consulting official pronouncements from the State Bank of Vietnam and other relevant ministries. The next step is to assess internal policies and procedures against these regulations, identifying any gaps or areas of potential noncompliance. This assessment should be followed by implementing corrective actions, which may include updating policies, enhancing technical controls, and conducting targeted staff training. Finally, a robust monitoring and auditing mechanism should be established to ensure ongoing compliance and to adapt to any changes in the regulatory environment or operational practices. Question 9. Quality control measures reveal that a relationship manager at BIDV provided significant investment advice to a corporate client via a series of instant messages, with only a brief summary note added to the client's file later. Which of the following approaches best aligns with BIDV regulatory obligations and best practices for client advisory services? Option A. Advise the client to formally request a written record of the advice if they require it for their own documentation purposes. Option B. Consider the instant messages as informal communication and rely solely on the brief summary note in the client's file, assuming the client understood the advice. Option C. Ensure the instant messages are archived and a detailed summary of the advice, including rationale and any disclaimers, is formally entered into the client management system, cross-referenced with the original messages. Option D. Instruct the relationship manager to delete the instant messages to avoid any potential misinterpretation and rely on their memory for future reference. The correct answer is C. Ensure the instant messages are archived and a detailed summary of the advice, including rationale and any disclaimers, is formally entered into the client management system, cross-referenced with the original messages. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient internal communication within BIDV with the regulatory requirement to maintain accurate and auditable records of client interactions, particularly concerning sensitive financial advice. The pressure to quickly resolve client queries can sometimes lead to informal communication channels that bypass formal documentation procedures, creating a risk of non-compliance and potential disputes. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves ensuring that all client advice, regardless of the communication channel, is documented in a manner that is retrievable, auditable, and compliant with BIDV internal policies and relevant Vietnamese banking regulations. This ensures transparency, accountability, and provides a clear record for regulatory review and dispute resolution. Specifically, Vietnamese banking laws and BIDV internal compliance guidelines mandate that client interactions, especially those involving financial advice, must be recorded to demonstrate adherence to prudential standards and customer protection principles. This approach upholds the integrity of client relationships and the bank's operational compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on verbal confirmations and informal notes for client advice. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for documented evidence of advice given, leaving BIDV vulnerable to disputes and regulatory scrutiny. Vietnamese banking regulations emphasize the importance of clear record-keeping for all client transactions and advisory services. Another incorrect approach is to only document advice when explicitly requested by the client. This is a reactive stance that does not proactively ensure compliance. Regulations require BIDV to maintain comprehensive records of its advisory activities as a matter of good practice and regulatory expectation, irrespective of client requests. A third incorrect approach is to delegate the responsibility of documenting advice to junior staff without adequate oversight or standardized procedures. This can lead to inconsistent documentation, missing information, and a lack of accountability, all of which are contrary to the principles of sound banking practice and regulatory compliance expected by the State Bank of Vietnam. Professional reasoning. Professionals at BIDV should adopt a proactive and systematic approach to client interaction documentation. This involves understanding the regulatory framework governing financial advice and record-keeping in Vietnam, adhering strictly to BIDV internal compliance policies, and utilizing approved systems for recording all client communications and advice. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the compliance department or legal counsel is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize regulatory adherence and client protection above expediency. Question 10. The performance metrics show a noticeable dip in transaction processing speed and an increase in data anomaly flags within BIDV core banking system. Considering the strict regulatory environment for Vietnamese commercial banks, which of the following actions best aligns with best practice for addressing these issues? Option A. Continue with standard operational procedures, assuming the performance metrics are temporary fluctuation, and defer any investigation until the issues become more severe or are formally flagged by regulators. Option B. Immediately report the suspected system failures and data integrity issues to the State Bank of Vietnam without conducting a thorough internal investigation or verification. Option C. Initiate an immediate, in-depth audit of data handling protocols and system logs involving the compliance and IT security departments to identify the root cause of the performance degradation and data anomalies, while adhering to all internal data privacy and reporting guidelines. Option D. Directly access and review individual customer transaction data to pinpoint specific instances causing the anomalies, bypassing standard data access request procedures to expedite the investigation. Correct answer is C. Initiate an immediate, in-depth audit of data handling protocols and system logs involving the compliance and IT security departments to identify the root cause of the performance degradation and data anomalies, while adhering to all internal data privacy and reporting guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for efficient internal operations with the strict regulatory requirements governing financial institutions in Vietnam, specifically concerning customer data privacy and the integrity of financial reporting. BIDV, as a commercial bank, operates under a stringent legal and ethical framework designed to protect customer information and ensure transparency. The pressure to quickly address performance dips without compromising these fundamental obligations necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach involves a systematic review of internal processes and data handling procedures, cross-referenced with relevant Vietnamese banking regulations and BIDV internal policies. This approach is correct because it prioritizes compliance with the law on the prevention and control of money laundering, the law on credit institutions, and data protection guidelines issued by the State Bank of Vietnam. By investigating potential data integrity issues or reporting discrepancies through authorized channels, and in accordance with established protocols, the bank upholds its legal obligations and ethical responsibilities to customers and regulators. This ensures that any corrective actions are both effective and compliant, preventing further regulatory breaches or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves directly accessing and manipulating customer transaction data without proper authorization or a clear audit trail would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate data privacy laws and potentially the law on the prevention and control of money laundering, which mandates strict controls over customer information. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately reporting suspected issues to external parties without internal verification and adherence to reporting protocols, would also be a failure. This bypasses internal control mechanisms and could lead to unsubstantiated accusations, damaging both the bank's reputation and potentially causing undue alarm to regulatory bodies. Furthermore, ignoring the performance metrics and continuing with business as usual would be a failure to act diligently, potentially exacerbating any underlying issues and leading to more severe regulatory consequences. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the issue and its potential impact. This is followed by a thorough review of applicable regulations and internal policies. The next step is to consult with relevant internal departments, e.g., compliance, risk management, IT, to gather information and assess the situation objectively. Actions should then be taken in strict accordance with established procedures, ensuring proper documentation and authorization at each stage. Escalation to senior management or regulatory bodies should only occur after internal investigation and in line with reporting requirements. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a moderate risk of potential fraud associated with a specific customer transaction type that BIDV currently processes using existing standard operating procedures. A junior analyst suggests implementing a new, more stringent verification step for these transactions, but this step is not explicitly detailed in current BIDV internal policies or mandated by the State Bank of Vietnam's regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the analyst to take? Option A. Immediately implement the new verification step as suggested by the risk matrix to proactively mitigate the identified fraud risk. Option B. Continue processing transactions using the existing procedures, as the risk is only moderate and not explicitly mandated by regulation. Option C. Propose the new verification step to a senior colleague for an informal opinion before deciding on implementation. Option D. Research BIDV internal risk management policies and relevant State Bank of Vietnam directives to determine if the proposed verification step aligns with established procedures or requires policy amendment. The correct answer is D. Research BIDV internal risk management policies and relevant State Bank of Vietnam directives to determine if the proposed verification step aligns with established procedures or requires policy amendment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge for BIDV employees in interpreting and applying risk assessment findings within the context of their operational duties. Difficulty lies in translating a high-level risk matrix entry into actionable, compliant procedures, especially when potential conflicts with existing internal policies or customer expectations arise. It requires a nuanced understanding of regulatory expectations for risk management and the ethical imperative to act with integrity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of BIDV internal risk management policies and procedures, cross-referencing them with relevant Vietnamese banking regulations. This ensures that any proposed action aligns with both the bank's established risk appetite and the legal framework governing its operations. Specifically, it necessitates consulting the State Bank of Vietnam's (SBV) directives on risk management and anti-money laundering (AML) to confirm that the proposed mitigation strategy is compliant and effective. This approach prioritizes regulatory adherence and robust internal controls, safeguarding BIDV and its customers. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately implement a new, unverified procedure based solely on the risk matrix without consulting internal policies or regulations. This bypasses essential due diligence, potentially leading to noncompliance with SBV regulations and creating new, unmanaged risks. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the hierarchical nature of decision-making in a regulated environment, where risk assessments inform policy but do not supersede it. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the risk matrix finding as an exaggeration and continue with existing practices. This ignores a critical warning signal from the bank's risk assessment framework, which is designed to identify potential vulnerabilities. Such an action would be a direct violation of the bank's duty to manage risks proactively and could expose BIDV to significant financial and reputational damage, as well as regulatory penalties for failing to address identified risks. A third incorrect approach is to seek informal advice from a colleague without proper documentation or verification. While collaboration is valuable, relying on informal opinions for critical risk mitigation can lead to misinterpretations of regulations or internal policies. This lacks the rigor required for compliance and can create a precedent for inconsistent risk management practices across the bank. Professional reasoning. Professionals at BIDV should adopt a structured decision-making process when faced with risk matrix findings. This involves 1. Understanding the specific risk identified and its potential impact. 2. Consulting BIDV comprehensive risk management framework, including internal policies and procedures. 3. Researching and verifying compliance with relevant regulations from the State Bank of Vietnam. 4. Developing and documenting a mitigation plan that is both effective and compliant. 5. Seeking formal approval for the plan from appropriate management levels and relevant departments, e.g., compliance, risk management. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that BIDV is considering launching a new innovative digital lending product. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with Vietnamese banking regulations and sound risk management practices? Option A. Prioritize the potential revenue generation of the new product, conducting only a superficial review of risks to avoid delaying the launch. Option B. Proceed with the product launch immediately to capitalize on market opportunities, addressing any identified risks reactively as they arise. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, analyze, and evaluate all potential risks, developing mitigation strategies aligned with BIDV risk appetite and regulatory requirements before launch. Option D. Postpone the risk assessment process until after the product has been launched and is generating revenue, citing current resource limitations. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify, analyze, and evaluate all potential risks, developing mitigation strategies aligned with BIDV risk appetite and regulatory requirements before launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the assessment of potential risks arising from a new product launch within BIDV, a Vietnamese commercial bank. The challenge lies in identifying and evaluating these risks accurately to ensure compliance with relevant Vietnamese banking regulations and internal policies, while also safeguarding the bank's financial stability and reputation. A careful judgment is required to balance innovation with prudent risk management. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks associated with the new product. This includes considering market risks, credit risks, operational risks, and compliance risks, all within the context of BIDV established risk appetite and regulatory environment. This approach is justified by the State Bank of Vietnam's SBV prudential regulations, which mandate robust risk management frameworks for financial institutions. Specifically, Circular 11/2021/TTNHNN on risk management in banking operations emphasizes the need for banks to establish and implement effective risk identification, measurement, monitoring, and control processes. Adhering to this approach ensures that BIDV proactively mitigates potential negative impacts, maintains compliance, and supports sustainable business growth. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the product launch without a thorough risk assessment would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the SBV's directives on prudent banking practices and could expose BIDV to substantial financial losses, reputational damage, and potential penalties from regulators. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the potential profitability of the new product while downplaying identified risks, demonstrates a disregard for risk management principles and regulatory expectations. This could lead to a situation where the bank takes on excessive risk, potentially jeopardizing its solvency and the interest of its depositors and stakeholders. A third incorrect approach, delaying the risk assessment indefinitely due to resource constraints, also represents a failure. While resource allocation is important, it cannot be used as an excuse to bypass fundamental risk management obligations. The SBV's regulations require timely and effective risk management, and any delay that compromises this principle is unacceptable. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach to risk management. This includes 1. Understanding the business objective launching a new product. 2. Identifying all potential risks associated with the objective. 3. Assessing the likelihood and impact of each risk. 4. Developing mitigation strategies. 5. Obtaining necessary approvals based on the risk assessment. And 6. Continuous monitoring of risks post-launch. This process ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and aligned with the bank's overall strategic goals and risk tolerance. Question 13. The efficiency study reveals that the proposed new digital payment solution for BIDV could significantly reduce transaction processing times and operational costs. However, the project team is considering skipping a detailed, formal risk assessment phase to expedite the launch and capture market share. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and professional risk management practices for BIDV? Option A. Delegate the entire risk assessment responsibility to the IT department, focusing only on technical vulnerabilities and system performance. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and mitigates potential operational, compliance, and security risks before the product launch, integrating findings into the development process. Option C. Prioritize the expedited launch to gain market advantage, deferring any significant risk assessment activities until after the product has been in the market for a defined period. Option D. Rely primarily on customer feedback gathered during a limited beta testing phase to identify and address potential issues, assuming this will cover most significant risks. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and mitigates potential operational, compliance, and security risks before the product launch, integrating findings into the development process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for BIDV employees by requiring them to balance operational efficiency with robust risk management, particularly in the context of new product development. The pressure to innovate and improve service delivery must be tempered by a thorough understanding of potential risks and compliance with relevant Vietnamese banking regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise the bank's financial stability, customer protection, or regulatory standing. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates with the product development lifecycle. This means proactively identifying, analyzing, and mitigating potential risks associated with the new digital payment solution before its launch. This aligns with the principles of prudent banking and the regulatory expectations in Vietnam for financial institutions to manage operational, credit, market, and compliance risks effectively. Specifically, Vietnamese banking laws and State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, circulars emphasize the need for banks to establish and maintain sound risk management systems, including those for new products and services, to ensure their safety and soundness. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings over thorough risk evaluation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for regulatory mandates that require proactive risk management. Such an approach could lead to unforeseen losses, reputational damage, and penalties from the SBV for noncompliance with risk management frameworks. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on customer feedback without a structured risk assessment framework is also flawed. While customer input is valuable, it does not substitute for a systematic identification and mitigation of all potential risks, including those not immediately apparent to users, such as data security breaches, system vulnerabilities, or regulatory noncompliance. This oversight could expose BIDV to significant liabilities. A third incorrect approach that delegates risk assessment entirely to the IT department without broader business and compliance input is inadequate. Risk management is a holistic function that requires input from various departments, including operations, legal, compliance, and business units, to ensure all facets of risk are considered. Relying solely on IT might overlook critical business or regulatory risks. Professionals at BIDV should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the strategic objectives of the new product, followed by a systematic risk identification process covering all relevant risk categories. This should involve cross-functional teams, clear documentation of identified risks, assessment of their likelihood and impact, and the development of mitigation strategies. The process must be iterative, with ongoing monitoring and review throughout the product lifecycle, ensuring alignment with BIDV internal policies and SBV regulations. Question 14. Investigation of a new loan application for a significant corporate client at BIDV reveals several potential red flags concerning the client's financial stability and industry outlook. The relationship manager, eager to meet quarterly targets, suggests downplaying these concerns to expedite approval. Which of the following approaches best reflects the required risk assessment protocol for BIDV? Option A. Rely solely on the client's assurances regarding their financial health and future prospects without independent verification. Option B. Expedite the loan approval process by focusing only on the positive aspects of the client's profile and deferring detailed risk analysis to a later stage. Option C. Conduct a thorough, independent risk assessment of the loan application, documenting all identified risks and proposing specific mitigation strategies. Regardless of immediate business pressures, Option D. Inform management of the potential risks, but recommend approval to avoid jeopardizing the business relationship and meeting targets. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, independent risk assessment of the loan application, documenting all identified risks and proposing specific mitigation strategies, regardless of immediate business pressures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BIDV employee due to the inherent conflict between identifying potential risks and the pressure to facilitate business growth. The need for careful judgment arises from balancing the bank's financial stability and regulatory compliance with its commercial objectives. A robust risk assessment framework is crucial to prevent adverse outcomes that could impact BIDV reputation and financial health. The correct approach involves a comprehensive and objective evaluation of all identified risks, considering their potential impact and likelihood, and recommending appropriate mitigation strategies. This aligns with BIDV internal risk management policies and the regulatory framework governing Vietnamese commercial banks, which mandate proactive risk identification and management to ensure soundness and stability. Such an approach upholds ethical responsibilities to stakeholders, including depositors, shareholders, and the broader financial system. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate business gains over thorough risk assessment would fail to adequately identify and address potential vulnerabilities. This could lead to significant financial losses, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage for BIDV. For instance, overlooking the creditworthiness of a new client or the potential for market volatility in a proposed investment would be a direct contravention of prudent banking practices and regulatory expectations. Another incorrect approach might involve selectively reporting risks to management, thereby creating a distorted view of the bank's risk profile. This undermines transparency and the ability of senior management to make informed decisions, potentially violating principles of good corporate governance and regulatory oversight. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the bank's risk appetite and tolerance levels. This involves systematically gathering information, objectively analyzing potential risks using established methodologies, and communicating findings transparently to relevant stakeholders. When faced with conflicting pressures, professionals must adhere to established policies and regulations, escalating concerns through appropriate channels if necessary, rather than compromising on risk management principles. Question 15. Strategic planning requires BIDV to assess the potential risks associated with launching a new digital lending platform. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory expectations and sound risk management principles for a commercial bank in Vietnam? Option A. Delegate the entire risk assessment process to the IT department without input from other relevant business units. Option B. Prioritize rapid platform deployment to capture market share, deferring detailed risk assessment until after the launch. Option C. Focus the risk assessment solely on the technological capabilities of the platform, assuming other risks are negligible. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment covering credit, operational, cybersecurity, compliance, and reputational risks, and develop mitigation strategies aligned with State Bank of Vietnam regulations. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment covering credit, operational, cybersecurity, compliance, and reputational risks, and develop mitigation strategies aligned with State Bank of Vietnam regulations. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for BIDV in balancing the need for strategic growth with robust risk management, particularly concerning the integration of a new digital lending platform. The challenge lies in ensuring that the pursuit of market share and operational efficiency does not compromise the bank's adherence to regulatory requirements and its commitment to sound financial practices. Careful judgment is required to identify and mitigate potential risks before they materialize, safeguarding both the bank's financial health and its reputation. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential risks associated with the digital lending platform. This includes assessing credit risk, operational risk, cybersecurity risk, compliance risk, and reputational risk. By proactively identifying these risks, BIDV can develop and implement appropriate mitigation strategies, such as enhanced due diligence processes, robust cybersecurity measures, and clear compliance protocols, ensuring alignment with the State Bank of Vietnam's (SBV) regulations on digital banking and risk management. This approach is ethically sound as it prioritizes the protection of customer assets and the stability of the financial system. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize rapid deployment and market penetration without a thorough risk assessment. This could lead to significant operational failures, such as data breaches or system malfunctions, exposing BIDV to financial losses and regulatory penalties from the SBV. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only addresses obvious risks, neglecting more subtle but potentially damaging issues like third-party vendor risks or evolving cyber threats. This oversight could result in non-compliance with SBV directives on IT security and operational resilience, leading to reputational damage and loss of customer trust. Furthermore, an approach that focuses solely on the technological aspects of the platform without considering the human element, such as inadequate staff training on new procedures and risk identification, would also be flawed, increasing the likelihood of errors and compliance breaches. Professionals at BIDV should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the strategic objectives. This understanding should then be mapped against potential risks, drawing upon relevant SBV regulations and guidelines. A multidisciplinary team, including representatives from IT, risk management, compliance, and business units, should collaborate to conduct the risk assessment. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates as the platform evolves and the regulatory landscape changes. Prioritizing risk mitigation strategies based on their potential impact and likelihood, and ensuring clear accountability for risk management responsibilities are crucial steps in this framework. Question 16. Operational review demonstrates that BIDV is considering launching a new digital lending product. Which of the following approaches to assessing the associated risks would be most appropriate and compliant with Vietnamese banking regulations? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that quantifies the potential financial and operational impacts of identified risks, evaluates them against BIDV risk appetite, and proposes specific mitigation strategies. Option B. Rely on general industry best practices and the risk assessment methodologies employed by similar international banks without conducting a specific, in-depth analysis tailored to BIDV operational environment and Vietnamese regulatory landscape. Option C. Recommend an immediate suspension of the product launch until all conceivable risks, however minor, can be completely eliminated through extensive, time-consuming due diligence. Option D. Prioritize the assessment based on the projected revenue and market share gains from the new product, assuming that profitability will naturally offset any unforeseen risks. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that quantifies the potential financial and operational impacts of identified risks, evaluates them against BIDV risk appetite, and proposes specific mitigation strategies. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the assessment of potential risks arising from a new product launch at BIDV. The challenge lies in identifying and evaluating these risks accurately, considering the bank's operational environment and regulatory obligations, without overreacting or underestimating potential impacts. A nuanced understanding of risk appetite and the bank's internal control framework is crucial. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers both the likelihood and impact of identified risks, aligning with BIDV established risk appetite framework. This approach is justified by the State Bank of Vietnam's SBV regulations on risk management for credit institutions, which mandate a proactive and systematic process for identifying, measuring, monitoring, and controlling risks. Specifically, Circular 13/2018/TTNHNN on prudential ratios for banks and foreign bank branches emphasizes the importance of robust risk management systems to ensure the safety and soundness of the banking operations. This approach ensures that potential issues are addressed before they materialize, protecting BIDV financial stability and reputation. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue generation of the new product, disregarding potential operational or compliance risks, fails to meet regulatory expectations. This oversight could lead to significant financial losses or regulatory penalties, as it neglects the fundamental principle of prudent risk management mandated by the SBV. An approach that recommends halting the product launch due to any perceived risk, without a proper assessment of its magnitude and potential mitigation strategies, demonstrates an overly conservative stance that may stifle innovation and business growth. While risk aversion is important, it must be balanced with a pragmatic evaluation of risks and rewards, as expected in a competitive banking environment. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or the experiences of other banks without conducting a specific, tailored risk assessment for BIDV context is insufficient. Regulatory frameworks require that risk assessments be specific to the institution and the product being launched, considering its unique operational capabilities and customer base. Professional reasoning. Professionals at BIDV should adopt a structured risk assessment methodology. This involves identifying potential risks, operational, credit, market, compliance, etc., analyzing their likelihood and impact, evaluating them against the bank's risk appetite, and developing appropriate mitigation plans. This process should be documented and reviewed by relevant stakeholders, including risk management and compliance departments, ensuring adherence to SBV regulation and best practices. Question 17. When evaluating a new corporate client's application for an account at BIDV, which approach to initial risk assessment best aligns with Vietnamese regulatory requirements for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing, while also being operationally efficient? Option A. Relying primarily on the client's self-declaration of their business activities and expected transaction volumes, with minimal independent verification. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive, independent verification of the client's business model, ownership structure, and transaction history, with enhanced due diligence triggered by any identified anomalies, and a standardized baseline for all clients. Option C. Implementing a uniform high level of enhanced due diligence for every single new corporate client, regardless of their perceived risk level. Option D. Prioritizing the speed of account opening by minimizing the due diligence process to only the most basic identity checks. The correct answer is B. Conducting a comprehensive, independent verification of the client's business model, ownership structure, and transaction history, with enhanced due diligence triggered by any identified anomalies and a standardized baseline for all clients. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires BIDV to balance the need for robust risk assessment with the practicalities of onboarding new clients and maintaining competitive service delivery. The pressure to quickly approve new accounts can lead to shortcuts in due diligence, potentially exposing the bank to significant financial crime risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessment processes are thorough without being unduly burdensome or discriminatory. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk-based assessment that considers both the client's profile and the nature of the proposed transactions. This aligns with the principles of anti-money laundering, AML, and counter-terrorist financing, CTF, regulations in Vietnam, which mandate that financial institutions implement risk-based approaches to customer due diligence, CDD. Specifically, regulations issued by the State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, and related decrees emphasize the importance of identifying and assessing customer risks to apply appropriate levels of scrutiny. This approach ensures that resources are focused on high-risk clients and activities, while still providing a baseline level of due diligence for all customers. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the client's stated business purpose without independent verification fails to adequately assess risk. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses essential CDD requirements designed to identify potential illicit activities. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes speed of onboarding over thoroughness, directly contravenes the spirit and letter of AML/CTF laws that demand a diligent and risk-aware process. This can lead to the bank becoming a conduit for money laundering or terrorist financing, resulting in severe legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust. A third incorrect approach, which applies a uniform, high level of scrutiny to all clients regardless of their risk profile, is inefficient and can lead to unnecessary operational costs and a poor customer experience, potentially driving legitimate business away from BIDV. While seemingly cautious, it deviates from the risk-based principle by not tailoring controls to the actual level of risk presented. Professionals at BIDV should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's business, its geographic reach, and the expected transaction patterns. This initial understanding should then inform the level of due diligence required. The process should involve verifying the client's identity and beneficial ownership, understanding the source of funds and wealth, and assessing the inherent risks associated with their industry and activities. Any discrepancies or red flags identified during this process should trigger enhanced due diligence measures. The entire process must be documented to demonstrate compliance and provide an audit trail. Question 18. Operational review demonstrates that BIDV is considering launching a new digital lending product targeting small and medium-sized enterprises, SME. The product aims to offer faster loan approvals and more flexible repayment terms compared to traditional methods. What is the most appropriate approach for BIDV to manage the potential risks associated with this new product launch? Option A. Focus primarily on the product's revenue potential and market share growth, addressing any emerging risks only after the product has been established in the market. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment covering operational, credit, market, liquidity, and compliance aspects, developing mitigation strategies and control measures before launch. Option C. Proceed with the launch based on initial market research indicating high demand, assuming that the product's innovative features will inherently mitigate most risks. Option D. Rely on the IT department's assessment of the digital platform's security and assume that this covers the majority of risks associated with the new lending product. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment covering operational, credit, market, liquidity, and compliance aspects, developing mitigation strategies and control measures before launch. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the assessment of potential risks arising from a new product launch at BIDV, a commercial bank. The challenge lies in identifying and evaluating these risks comprehensively, ensuring that the bank's operations remain compliant with Vietnamese banking regulations and internal policies, and that customer interests are protected. A thorough risk assessment is crucial to prevent financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a systematic and multifaceted risk assessment that considers operational, credit, market, liquidity, and compliance risks associated with the new product. This approach aligns with the prudential regulations issued by the State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, and the general principles of sound risk management expected of licensed credit institutions. Specifically, regulations often mandate that banks have robust internal control systems and risk management frameworks in place before introducing new products or services. This includes identifying potential vulnerabilities, assessing their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. Ethical considerations also demand that BIDV ensures the product is fair, transparent, and does not exploit customer vulnerabilities, which is a core tenet of responsible banking practices. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the launch without a thorough risk assessment, assuming that the product's perceived benefits outweigh any potential downsides. This neglects the regulatory requirement for proactive risk management and could lead to significant operational disruptions, financial instability, and breaches of customer trust. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on marketability and profitability, overlooking potential compliance issues or the impact on BIDV liquidity. This demonstrates a failure to adhere to the comprehensive risk management principles mandated by the SBV, which requires a balanced consideration of all risk categories. Furthermore, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or informal feedback rather than structured analysis fails to meet the standards of due diligence and professional responsibility expected of a financial institution. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a structured and documented risk assessment process. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all relevant risk categories, gathering data from various sources, analyzing the identified risks, and developing appropriate control measures and contingency plans. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates as the product's performance and market conditions evolve. This systematic approach ensures that BIDV can make informed decisions that balance innovation with the imperative of maintaining financial stability and regulatory compliance. Question 19. Analysis of the proposed launch of a new structured investment product by BIDV, which has not been previously offered in the Vietnamese market, requires a comprehensive evaluation of potential risks. Which of the following approaches best aligns with BIDV regulatory obligations and sound risk management principles in Vietnam? Option A. Conducting a thorough, data-driven risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and quantifies all potential operational, credit, market, liquidity, compliance, and reputational risks specific to the new product and its target market in Vietnam, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Option B. Prioritizing the assessment of potential revenue streams and market demand, with a secondary consideration for risks only if they directly impact immediate profitability. Option C. Relying on the success of similar products launched by international banks in different regulatory environments as a primary basis for risk evaluation. Option D. Deferring detailed risk assessment until after the product has been launched and initial customer feedback is received to gauge actual market performance. Correct answer is B. Prioritizing the assessment of potential revenue streams and market demand, with a secondary consideration for risks only if they directly impact immediate profitability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a BIDV employee to identify and address potential risks arising from a new product launch, balancing innovation with regulatory compliance and customer protection. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the multifaceted risks associated with a novel financial instrument in the Vietnamese market, where specific regulations might be evolving or require nuanced interpretation. Careful judgment is needed to ensure that the risk assessment is comprehensive, forward-looking, and aligned with BIDV risk appetite and the prevailing regulatory environment in Vietnam. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic identification and evaluation of all potential risks, including operational, credit, market, liquidity, compliance, and reputational risks, specific to the new product and its target market within Vietnam. This approach aligns with the principles of sound risk management expected of financial institutions under Vietnamese banking regulations, which emphasize a robust internal control system and comprehensive risk assessment frameworks. It ensures that BIDV can anticipate potential adverse events, implement appropriate mitigation strategies, and comply with directives from the State Bank of Vietnam, SBV, regarding new product approvals and risk management. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the potential revenue generation of the new product without a thorough risk assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the fundamental regulatory expectation for financial institutions to prioritize risk management and capital adequacy over short-term profit maximization. Such an approach could lead to significant financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory sanctions from the SBV for noncompliance with prudential norms. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences with similar but not identical products without a specific, data-driven assessment for the new offering would also be flawed. This would fail to account for the unique characteristics and potential risks of the new product in the current Vietnamese economic and regulatory landscape. It could result in an underestimation of risks and inadequate mitigation plans, exposing BIDV to unforeseen losses and regulatory scrutiny. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment methodology that includes defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all relevant risk categories, gathering data and information, analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks, evaluating the effectiveness of existing controls, and developing a risk mitigation plan. This process should be iterative and involve cross-functional teams, including risk management, product development, compliance, and legal departments, to ensure a holistic view. Regular review and updates to the risk assessment are crucial, especially in a dynamic market like Vietnam. Professionals should always refer to the latest guidelines and circulars issued by the State Bank of Vietnam and internal BIDV risk policies. Question 20. System analysis indicates that BIDV is considering onboarding a new corporate client operating in a rapidly evolving technology sector. The client has provided standard documentation, but their business model involves complex digital transactions and cross-border data flows. Which of the following approaches best aligns with BIDV risk assessment responsibilities? Option A. Conduct a detailed risk assessment, including enhanced due diligence measures to understand the client's specific business model, transaction patterns, and data handling practices, and consult with the compliance department regarding any identified complexities. Option B. Rely solely on the client's self-declaration of compliance with all relevant regulations, without independent verification or further investigation. Option C. Defer the onboarding process indefinitely due to the perceived complexity of the technology sector, opting to avoid potential risks altogether. Option D. Proceed with onboarding the client after a cursory review of the provided documentation, assuming the technology sector's inherent risks are manageable through standard procedures. The correct answer is D. Proceed with onboarding the client after a cursory review of the provided documentation, assuming the technology sector's inherent risks are manageable through standard procedures. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a BIDV employee because it requires balancing the bank's operational efficiency with robust risk management, specifically concerning the onboarding of a new corporate client. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating potential risks without unduly hindering legitimate business activities, demanding careful judgment and adherence to established procedures. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically evaluates the potential threats associated with the new client. This includes understanding the client's business model, industry, financial health, and any potential links to illicit activities. This approach is justified by BIDV internal risk management policies and the regulatory framework governing Vietnamese financial institutions, which mandate thorough due diligence to prevent money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. Adhering to these regulations ensures the bank's integrity and compliance. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of onboarding over thorough risk evaluation. This could lead to regulatory breaches, reputational damage, and financial losses if the client is involved in fraudulent or illegal activities. Another incorrect approach would be to apply a one-size-fits-all risk assessment without considering the specific nature of the client's business. This might result in either unnecessary hurdles for legitimate clients or insufficient scrutiny for high-risk ones, both of which are professionally unacceptable and violate the principles of effective risk management. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's profile and the associated risks. This involves consulting BIDV Know Your Customer (KIC) and anti-money laundering (AML) policies, seeking guidance from the compliance department when necessary, and documenting all assessment steps and decisions. The process should be iterative, allowing for adjustments based on new information and escalating concerns to appropriate levels within the bank.